Hey everybody, it's Ruby here today, and today I thought I would do the much anticipated book review, House of Leaves. This is a book that a lot of people on BookTube have recommended to me, a lot of booktubers have liked it, and a lot of people in the comments have told me to just read it. They've seen it on my shelves and been like, no, you need to read this. So I read it in about 4 days over the Christmas break while I was supposed to be studying. And I liked it a lot more than I thought I would. A lot of people, a lot of family and friends had suggested it to me, and for some reason I didn't think it was really up my alley. I think it was more horror than anything else, and 600 pages kind of deterred me from reading it. So you don't really know if a book's going to be good until you start reading it, and I didn't really start reading it until about a month ago. The book is great in a lot of different ways. It is a conceptual, postmodern book about a house, but also about the nature of an unreliable narrator, which is why it's really hard to explain the plot of it. So I will try my best, and I'll put this book down because it's heavy and I don't want to have to wave this around as I'm talking, and I'll just show you guys if there's something interesting. So, the book has a couple of different people talking about this house, which is House of Leaves. House of Leaves is a book, or House of Leaves is a house bought by the photographer Navidson and his wife and 2 children who decide to live in the suburbs after their family's kind of on the rocks. Navidson is known to go on a lot of adventures, a lot of risk-taking, risking adventures, so he promises that they'll just settle down and focus on family for a little while. What they discover, however, is that the inside of the house is bigger than the outside, which is structurally impossible, and he brings a couple people in, and while they come in, they discover that there's a new hallway to the house that hasn't been discovered before. So this was created into a documentary which was well known like across the world. Zampano, who is this blind old guy, writes about it in this sort of non-fiction this non-fiction biographical philosophical novel book thing where he sort of explains what happened in the documentary and what sort of ripples it caused and the theories behind why this house is the way that it is. That interpretation, or that book, is discovered by Johnny Truant, who discovers Zampano dead in his apartment building and sees the book written. And so he starts to explore all of these different people, all these different women who had helped him write it down because he had been blind. And all these different translators and interpreters along the way to try and find out if this book is real and where the documentary went. Because the documentary is gone. This book says that it happened, that there's a whole bunch of celebrities talking about it, that these philosophers discussed it, Stephen King supposedly watched it, all of these different people, and yet it is not there. So you have 3 different narrators. You have Navidson, the documentarian, you have Zampano, who's talking about this documentary that is gone missing, and Johnny Truant, who's trying to find what Zampano was really talking about. Right at the very beginning, Johnny Truant says that he's an unreliable narrator, that he will change the narrative that Zampano had brought to the table. So you already know that a lot of this stuff is not quite there, and there's a lot of clues in the book, which I won't really mention, which suggest that what we're given as these 3 narrators could be 1 or 2 other authors. We also have like letters to Johnny Truant from his mother, who is in an institute, which creates this code which you can use in different parts of the book, and generally it's just like a masterpiece of what it means to have a narrative. It's considered horror because it's defamiliarizing something that we take for granted, which is a house. So making something creepy like a house will of course give it a horror element, but there's nothing in particular that would make it considerably terrifying other than your own imagination. The book itself is also a masterpiece in that it will often embody what's going on. So you'll have regular pages which will have footnotes upon footnotes upon footnotes. If there's a really intense scene, you'll often only have 1 or 2 words on a page. So it's embodied in that when you're reading it, you're physically experiencing what the characters are also feeling. The word house is also printed in color in blue, which I don't think was always in the publication. I think it was in future editions. But a lot of people who read it or reread it will become really creeped out by this one word that will come out in blue because it like pops out of the page. So you know that you have to expect something kind of creepy going on. He also brings like Foucault into it and a whole bunch of other philosophers that talk about the other or the uncanny. There's an element to this book that folds over in on itself where it'll sort of explain why it is that something's creepy. I looked it up and the author actually did a documentary or was part of a documentary about Derrida, who's post-structuralist. So it sort of deconstructs a narrative or what you assume to be the case of a book, which is super interesting. The unreliable narrator also deconstructs that like subjective experience too, and everybody who reads it kind of comes away with a different interpretation. And when I'd first heard that, I thought it was kind of weird for someone to say something like that because, of course, when you read a book, everybody's going to come up with a different interpretation. Like, that's the nature of reading. And that was the main point of postmodernism and post-structuralism. So, like, an author can put some say into something and say, you know, this is what my true interpretation or my true meaning had been of this book. But if a reader doesn't pick up on it, then really is that the true message of the book? So that's something that this brings across, because throughout the book there's different clues of different narrators that could actually be writing it, and maybe there's not actually 3 different people going on, maybe there's 1, maybe there's 2. So everybody kind of comes away with it with a different idea of who the narrator is, and that is completely through the reader's interpretation, which I think is super interesting. It's well written, a lot of the characters are very believable, there's a lot of vivid imagery, and even the things that are nonfiction that Zampano had written about were just as interesting as the life of Johnny Truant or the house of Navidson. So overall, just an amazing book to read. It's not actually 600 pages because of all of the footnotes and things that sort of crowd it. I would say that it would be maybe like 400 or something like that, but definitely takes you less time to read it than you necessarily would. I would say this is one of my top books of all time of the year, maybe top 10 ever that I've read, and I'm surprised that I hadn't read it before, a little embarrassed that I hadn't listened to people to read it, but I finally did. I would give this a 5 out of 5, and I would recommend that anybody who's interested in literary criticism, science fiction, speculative fiction, horror, or philosophy would be interested in this book. So, thanks for hearing me out. Write in the comments if you've read this book and if there's anything that you would add to this review or that you found interesting about it or that drew you to it, or maybe just how you came across it. No spoilers, please. Not that there necessarily would be. I don't think anything would be ruined by saying anything, but I do think that if you start to talk about different theories, it covers other people's readings of the book. So, like, subscribe, do your thing, and I will talk to you guys later.